welcome everybody. I want to thank you very much for taking the time today. I know it was cryptic, I know it was short notice, but it goes to show you that Calgary steps up and shows up. So thank you very much for making the time. Prime Minister, thank you. Merci pour parler de nous aujourd'hui. C'est vraiment intéressant pour vous avoir, pour parler de la conversation entre nos communautés, des leaders de nos communautés. As everybody in this room knows, I tend to start off my fireside chats, my one-on-ones with a certain question, and it can't be an exception today. So, Prime Minister, who the hell are you and why are you here? I think we know the first answer now, but maybe we just jump to the second one. What's happening?
Listen, I'm just really happy to be here. And I'm here because, obviously, exchanging with all of you and sharing part of what we're doing and how we see the future unfolding for this country, for this province, and indeed for the city, is something that needs a lot of engagement. And I'm glad to look through the room and see a number of people that I've worked with before in various ways on various projects. Glad to be here with George Chahal, our great MP for Skyview, and highlight the work that he's been doing. But I've been coming to Alberta regularly since pretty much the first day I got elected as an MP. I launched my leadership race here in Alberta, and the last name notwithstanding, Joe, I have always been interested and engaged and committed to building success for Alberta. And it's very much serving for the whole country, because Alberta has always been a massive driver of success for the entire country. And keeping Alberta successful in a changing world is something that matters deeply to me. Now, there's lots of perspectives on how to do that, and lots of differences in whether you're looking at it in a really short term or a medium term or a long term. But these are conversations that I've had with many of you over the years, and I'm going to continue to have. The world is changing in very, very big ways, and that's having some very real impacts, not just on the way our economy works, but on the way our communities unfold, on the way people see their own future, on the kinds of jobs and the kinds of work people do. And that instability and uncertainty is leading to an awful lot of anxiety out there that is causing a lot of people to worry about their place in the future. And part of the job of any leader or prime minister is to make sure we're bringing people together and giving them optimism about the kinds of future we're going to be able to build together. Whether it's climate change, whether it's the pandemic that we're still getting over in certain ways with certain aftershocks from it, whether it's the transformation of the way we're working, whether it's looking for getting to net zero, as even the Alberta government has committed to by 2050, there are really big things that we're going to have to prepare for now. And how we do that now, in terms of making sure we're able to build that success for the future, while at the same time supporting people now, is what I've been focused on for my entire time in government. There's lots of details on how we do it. I believe in the future of the energy sector. I also know that the future of the energy sector is going to be involving in decarbonizing. Because that's what the world's asking for and what it's looking for. And there's lots of solutions that are coming from here in Alberta. This is the #1 place for investment in renewables around the country, for green energy in the country, for good reason. The innovation is here, the knowledge is here, the hard work is here, and a lot of the capital to leverage into that is here as well. So there's a lot of excitement going on. I think there's a great opportunity for Alberta to be leading not just Canada but the world in the kind of future we need to build. When it comes to building stronger communities, going after the challenges around the cost of living, making sure that everyone is part of the economy that we're building for the future, whether it's Indigenous people, whether it's every generation, whether it's new arrivals. There are ways of building strong, resilient communities that, quite frankly, have been showcased here in Alberta for generations. You do partnerships with Indigenous people better than any government in Canada has from the business sector for a long time in Alberta. And that's something that we all can draw on and learn from. There's a lot of really exciting things to go, but one of the things that is preoccupying me is one of the things that got me into politics in the first place is the idea that young people were feeling left out of Canada's success over the past many, many years and generations. And young people, particularly if you talk about Generation Z and millennials, they are facing a system that seems stacked against them in a whole bunch of ways. Spending more and more on rent, not even be able to imagine being able to buy a home, given not just the housing crisis, but so many other factors that are pushing back at them, even if they have good jobs. There's a sense of worry about the future, about the geopolitics shifting, about the impacts of climate change. I was here in Edmonton in February when Alberta announced the start of the wildfire season. In February, we're seeing this is a record drought year coming up, which means there's going to be really bad fires. There are things we need to do right now, and young people are anxious about the kind of world they're growing up in, and that anxiety means we as leaders, whether it's political or business, need to step up to allay those fears and to empower young people to be able to succeed in all sorts of ways. When I talk about young people, it's not just 15-year-olds, it's 35-year-olds who are really, really aware that the world is not following the same kinds of rules as it did for their parents. As a society, we always have choices. Do we instrumentalize and amplify the fears and anxieties that people are facing? Or do we work hard to allay those fears? Do we acknowledge the concerns people have and try to solve for them? Or do we say, okay, let's see if we can get re-elected or elected by making people even matter? I know path I choose, and part of that is having real conversations about the challenges we're facing, and that's why I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. Alors, merci Brad pour l'invitation, et j'ai bien hâte à la conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Obviously, you were here for an announcement this morning. Maybe can you talk to us a little about housing and the housing strategy, and what's the plan for you guys right now? What are you thinking, and where's this going for us?
Well, we have been concerned with the housing situation for many, many years. We launched a housing strategy in 2017, a national housing strategy, that really got the federal government back into being part of the housing challenges in this country. Previous governments had reduced and even almost completely eliminated any role for the federal government in housing. And that is something that contributed to the kinds of pressures that we're facing right now. There's lots of factors that went into it. The pandemic certainly changed behaviors in housing. The growing population in Canada put more pressure on our housing stocks. So there's a lot of factors that went into why we have housing right now. The fact that the economy has been growing very well over the past years also puts pressure on housing as people are seeing rents driven up and costs of homes going up. The biggest way to solve that is with supply, is making sure we are building more houses across the country in a very, very real way. One of the things we did was we established a national housing accelerator. That is something that we worked out with different cities here in Calgary. It's hundreds of millions of dollars to change the way the rules are laid out in terms of housing. 4 units as of right on every single lot. Increased densification around transit stops. Moving forward on better use of public land. Investments in more and deeper housing affordability. Recognizing the need for duplexes, fourplexes, row housing to create that density, that missing middle housing we need. At the same time as we're making changes to the rental market to accelerate the construction of more and more apartment buildings, to have those rental units, including 3 and 4 bedroom units that will allow for families to actually live in them. At the same time as we do things like, and this was a big thing we announced last week that is a huge change for a lot of people who are increasingly paying a huge part of their monthly revenues on rent, but not getting any credit for it from banks and credit agencies because it's not actually borrowed money. It's just them paying the rent. Well, if we can make sure that banking institutions are able to track and take account of you paying your rent on time every month for years, that should be able to unlock a mortgage. It should be able to go towards your credit score. These are the kinds of changes that we can make that value and they start people getting paths for ownerships. Today, the announcement was around a much more deliberate industrial strategy around solving housing. If you think about it, if we built cars the way we build houses, we would have an automobile crisis right now, not enough cars for the world, for the country. We need to look at, particularly when it comes to row homes or duplexes or quadruplexes or multi-unit housing, we need to accelerate the way we build homes. Build them more in factories, build them more in prefab, make sure that they are quicker to go up, standardized in their models across the country so they can be done at scale. And that's how we're going to solve the housing crisis. And what we announced today was $600 million towards the kind of innovation using 3D printing, AI, empowering the workers that are doing amazing jobs, but in a construction worker shortage, to have more automation, more tools to build more homes faster, even in beautiful spring days like this where the snow keeps falling and construction has to slow down because you're doing it inside.
So I think I've had the answer. I'm asking was, what does success look like? Like when we talk about this, I think it's great, but can you help us? I mean, obviously there's a lot of business people here who understand what is that success measure and how do you measure against that, and what are those sort of benchmarks that you want to set for yourself or for the government?
Far too many people are paying over 50% for housing costs every single month. Whether that's people who've had to renegotiate their mortgages under very difficult situations, or just people continuing to face massive pressures on rent. We need to increase the supply. We need to make sure that there is less pressure on rents rising. We need to protect people from rent evictions. We need to make sure that finding housing isn't the biggest stressor on people's lives right now. And that's where we are. We need to make sure that young people can once again believe they can do like their parents and grandparents did when they built this city and cities like it, and access home ownership as part of how they're going to build a successful life. We don't have that right now because we are falling way behind on the kind of housing supply we need. So success looks like all orders of government, municipal, provincial, federal, working with Indigenous communities where necessary and in those communities to solve for this housing crisis, because that actually gives the steady base and foundation from which people can build the success in the economy.
Okay, so on that note though, I mean, if you look at the numbers, we know that our labor growth is going to come from immigration. So how do we square that circle? We have the big demand coming, but there's more pressure on the infrastructure, on schools, on housing. How does that come into play, and what policies are you thinking about to help make that work for us?
As we know, immigration is both a challenge but also a solution on that. When we're having shortages of healthcare workers, we have shortages of construction workers, immigration can be a real solution on that in terms of just growth in the community, but also people to do those jobs. Immigration has always been a key driver of growth and stronger communities in our country. One of the challenges is, particularly since the pandemic, there's been different pressures on our immigration system. We have, even as we've steadily grown the number of permanent residents coming into this country, we're now up in the upper 400,000 PRs a year. We're on our way to 500,000 a year who will stabilize. That, for a country of 40 million people, of our size, of our capacity to integrate people, is exactly the right and reasonable level for us. It'll make sure we keep bringing in people so our communities can grow, so we can have those people to fill the jobs that we need. That's not the challenge we're facing right now. The challenge we're facing right now is, particularly since the pandemic, we have seen a massive spike in temporary arrivals. International students that went from about 150, 200,000 a year before the pandemic to being close to 800,000 students a year. That puts massive pressure on the communities around them, where they're trying to find rent, where they're driving up prices to a certain extent. But it also puts massive pressure on the institutions, even though they're making a lot of money off of it. And mostly, it is degrading the quality of the experience and the education that those international students are getting. We're seeing a huge spike in mental health challenges from them, people who are being taken advantage of by diploma mills that aren't really educational institutions, taking advantage of the high student fees. So there's been a real challenge by that, abuse by certain institutions and certain provinces, although that's not widespread across the country, that requires us to say, okay, let's put on the brakes a little bit. The other challenge is in temporary foreign workers. There will always be sectors like berry picking and certain agricultural jobs and certain fish packing jobs that it's really hard to find Canadians to do. And there is a long history and a responsible path around bringing in temporary foreign workers for that kind of seasonal work. but temporary foreign workers have become a way that far too many companies and industries in the country have leaned on to a greater proportion than ever before. And that's putting pressure, again, on our housing. We went from about 2 or 3% of our population being temporary immigrants in 2017 to being up over 6%, maybe even 6.5%, according to some calculations, of our population in just a few years. That's the thing that we are really challenged with, and it's no good for anyone, for people being exploited, for students not getting the education they want, or for the communities that they're putting all this pressure on. We just have to make sure that that gets back into a responsible path, into a sustainable level of being able to integrate these people, ideally with pathways towards citizenship for people who come here. That's one of the reasons Canada's been so successful around immigration, is we've been able to then successfully integrate them into communities to build that success and to grow forward. So this is something we're working very much with the provinces on, because temporary workers and international students are a huge intersection with provincial frameworks and requirements. And we're going to try and get things back to the level where all Canadians can unequivocally be in favor of immigration, because it is ambitious, optimistic, open, but also at a level that allows for all of our communities to succeed.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, that puts a lot of pressure on the finance part. We know that there's a budget coming down in 11 days. Obviously, we've heard about some of the investments you're looking to make. Can you share anything else with the group today? Any breadcrumbs or surprises that we might be able to maybe look forward to?
Well, let me share a little bit the frame of the budget, and I've talked about it a little bit already. It's the idea of fairness for every generation. The idea that the success we're living right now wasn't built by all of us in the room. It was built by what previous generations did to build the infrastructure, to build the opportunities, to set us up for success, to create a framework in which we could then build even more success. And that's been the story of this country, that every generation has succeeded because of the hard work of previous generations and built those opportunities in that capacity. And over the past years, not just recently, but I'd say since the end of the financial crisis of 2008, when the economy bounced back, but jobs didn't, wages certainly didn't, things went offshore and stayed offshore, there's been a sense that there's been a hollowing out of the middle class, of the opportunities that people have had. And that is not long-term sustainable. It leads to falling for either populism of the far right or of the far left, as you look at different democracies around the world, where trying to find a way to instrumentalize that anger rather than solving those challenges is very tempting for certain political operations and parties. What we've been focused on since 2015 is solving for that challenge. And it's interesting that as we went one way in 2015, the US went a different way in 2016. But there were symptoms of the same problems, this idea that there's a hollowing out of the middle class. So what we did from the very beginning is we said, no, we're going to make reconciliation with Indigenous people a priority. We're going to make sure pay equity and bringing women into the workforce is a priority. We're going to fight climate change and create an economy of the future and make sure there's good jobs for the future. We're going to make sure that young people and everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed. These are the things we're doing forward as we build it. And after a few years of doing that, I remember someone saying, okay, it's all great that you're doing all these really nice things for communities and for the economy and for people. Well, nice things for people and for communities. When are you going to start talking about the economy? And I point out that everything we're doing, when you're working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, you're better able to get big projects built, whether it's pipelines or mines or forestry projects, and build partnerships around natural resources. Getting women into the workforce with an issue like $10 a day childcare adds significantly to our economic productivity, making sure that young people have the best chance to succeed, regardless of what community they're brought up in or what part of the country they're brought in, is about building a strong economy. And this economy and this budget recognizes that more than ever before, things are stacked against the millennials and the Xers that are the heart of our economy right now and going to define Canada's success for coming generations. When you talk to young people these days, whether it's a young mom who's 35 and just can't imagine being able to own her own home with the challenges they face, or young people who look at the job market they're coming into university about and they're just like, well, how am I going to make ends meet? I can get a good and decent job, but whether it's housing, whether it's groceries, whether it's the cost of everything, we no longer feel that we're going to be able to succeed. The focus of this budget is going to be to give that optimism back with real, tangible solutions around housing, around a school food program that we announced on Monday, around structure for childcare, around more infrastructure like wastewater and water services so we can build more housing developments. Like, these are all building blocks of the economy we're going to build. And yes, because I know it's a business audience, we're going to do it within our means. We're going to make sure that Canada retains the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7, that we continue to be one of the top 3 largest economies in the world with a AAA credit rating from the bond rating agencies, that we keep doing the kinds of things that, quite frankly, since we got elected in 2015, Canada's seen a 60% increase in foreign direct investment to this country. Because people are looking at the social, political stability, they're looking at our plan to fight climate change and be responsible into the future, but mostly they're looking at our natural resources and our human resources. The fact that we have some of the best educated people in the OECD, optimistic, willing to roll up their sleeves and work hard and build that future. That's what brings in Volkswagen and Dow Chemicals. That's what brings in the Rio Tintos and the investors from around the world that see that Canada is a good place to invest, not just for the next year, but for the next 30 years. And continuing to present that as a plan and as a vision for how we look clear-eyed at the challenges the world is coming and realize that Canada, with our resources, with our diversity, with our growing population, with our trade deals with the world, we're now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. That happened under our watch. These are the things that people are looking at Canada and saying, we want to be part of it. There's huge reasons to be optimistic about Canada, but we can't take it for granted. And part of the great things that are drawing the world to Canada are the things that we need to stand up for, invest in, and continue. And that's what this budget is going to be focused on.
Okay. Obviously, our job is to talk economy all the time. So
of course.
I'm probably going to come back and ask a question about the budget in a second. But obviously, you're in the energy capital of our country, and we can't be here unless we have a conversation about sustainability, about carbon. Obviously, there's a lot of people in this room who are vested in making that happen for us. Obviously, we've seen the sector drive towards decarbonization and work through that. But when we look at the way things have been done, I mean, can you talk us through a little bit about the thinking with respect to the emissions cap versus the idea of carbon pricing, or especially industrial carbon pricing? As Alberta's been a leader for 20 years plus now in driving that. We're seeing that happen through that system. But can you walk us through, obviously everybody here wants to ask this question, so we have to ask this question, but can you walk us through the dichotomy between what's been proven to work and where your current government wants to go?
It's not even about where the government wants us to go. It's about where capital is going around the world. It's about what people are looking to invest in. And you are seeing increasingly investors from around the world are asking questions about what the long-term plan is. The Alberta government has recognized that we need to get to net zero by 2050. And in order to do that, there's no one tool that's going to make that difference. We need the predictability, we need the clarity, we need the support. The ITC investments we're making that are allowing for, whether it's CCUS, whether it's Air Products, whether it's Dow Chemical, whether it's a range of investments that we're seeing that are coming in. There's a lot of excitement here for Canada being the purveyor and provider of energy and solutions that a net zero world is going to need. My question and my challenge is, as a government, is how do we set ourselves up for success to be able to position Alberta and Canada as creating those solutions? And that's where clear price signals, that's where a cap on emissions, as opposed to a cap on production, which it is not, it's a cap on emissions. As we look at the fact that the world is going to need barrels of oil for many, many, many decades to come, but is increasingly going to look at lower carbon barrels, how can we make sure that those barrels that the world is going to want to buy are going to be here in Alberta, are going to be here in Canada? What can we do around innovation that is going to create those solutions in order to make sure that as the world changes, as the world demands decarbonization, Alberta can still be at the forefront of the energy sector in Canada and contributing to solutions around the world? Now that, to go straight to it, was one of the reasons why, to the dismay of a whole bunch of people who voted for me, I bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Why? Because I knew that staying prisoners to the US market for our barrels of oil was going to limit the amount of profits we were going to make to be able to then reinvest in the solutions the future is going to need. So making sure we're investing in the kind of long-term plays that are going to matter is something that we've already seen companies in Alberta leading the way on. The level of green investment in the country where it's highest is here in Alberta, which is why I still don't quite understand what the Premier was thinking when she put a halt on renewables or put a pause on renewable investments. I think this is very, very exciting to know that so many of the classic oil companies, oil and gas companies, are also diversifying massively, because we know that as the world changes, we want to be ahead of the curve. And a clear price signal on pollution, on emissions, on what you don't want, so that companies can be very, very clear as they say, okay, as we're doing our math for the next 10 years, knowing that the cost of emitting is going to keep going up, let's innovate, let's make an investment in a better solution so that we're not dinged by that price on pollution. And just like the heavy emitters framework, it is encouraging the kind of innovation and investment that's going to leave us better off into the future.
So going back to the budget, then, can we expect something around this for Alberta? Like, is there something you can share? Again, this group would love to hear the thinking around the budget. Is there something that's going to help us?
Despite all the announcements we made around the budget is still only going to come out on the 16th.
You're here.
And there are, I will regularly come back, I promise you that. And I think we've demonstrated as a government that we're continuing to invest in Alberta. $16 billion in ITCs for pathways, for example. I mean, these are things that we believe in. We need Alberta to be successful. And more than that, we need Albertans to be successful. One of the things that has always worried me, particularly about certain sectors, and this doesn't count a vast majority of the good players, but there's a lot of people who are saying, oh no, looks like the world is starting to move away from fossil fuels. While they're still good, let's do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, and when that's done, then we'll just walk away. What does that capital leave behind if it walks away, if it's not diversifying, if it's only betting on trying to get every last bit of profit they can until the world figures out how to move on? What does that do to the communities? What does that do to the workers in the oil sector? What does that do to people who are here building their families and their lives, that right now are working in a very profitable industry that we know is going to be changed significantly around the world over the coming decades? If we're not part of, not just part of being in that change, but part of leading and innovating through that change, that's going to leave Albertans in a very, very difficult place. Because capital will go elsewhere around the world where there are new opportunities. But families here in Alberta will be left holding the short end of the stick if we don't make sure that those solutions are also being built here in Alberta. That's what our government has been focused on, and quite frankly, that's what this business community has been hugely focused on in the diversification, in the decarbonization that they're doing. And yes, we are stacking the deck to reward people who are doing that more, because we know that's where the world is going. And that's where the jobs that the next generation, the generation after that of Albertans are facing. A few years ago, I was in Hamilton in a classic steel plant, and I was meeting some of those overall folks who were proud to say that they were third and even fourth generation steel workers in Hamilton. And we were making hundreds of millions of dollars investment in carbon arc technology so they could get away from coking coal-produced steel to electric arc steel. And those workers looked at me and said, because of this investment, like, forget what it's going to do for clean air in Hamilton and everything like that. Oh, yeah, okay, that's all nice. But because of this investment, I know there's going to be a 7th and 8th generation of steel workers in Hamilton over the next 100 years, because we're making the investment in something that is cleaner, but also more competitive and better suited for the future. That's what we need to do in our industries across this country, where there's still going to be really challenging, difficult, hard jobs that people are going to be working as pipe fitters. But instead of oil and gas, there'll be pipe fitters for hydrogen. There'll be a technology shift that'll happen over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But that's the way the country is going. That's the way Alberta's going. And I see it in the investments that you are all making as well. How do you make sure that there are good jobs for Albertan families that are right now making great money in the oil sector, when there is less of an oil sector in the future? Well, we make sure there's a strong hydrogen sector. Make sure what we're leading on in CCUS is allowing for abatement. That means natural gas is not just a transition fuel, but a part of our energy mix in the future. Investments into nuclear. I mean, the opportunities around nuclear, when Canada actually preserved the nuclear industry while other countries around the world were disbanding theirs. Like, we've been selling reactors to Romania, to working with Eastern European countries that are trying to get off their reliance on the Russian nuclear industry, which is great for Cameco, great for BHP, great for the Canadian investments that are going to say, look, we can do this with you around energy. There are so many exciting opportunities for people who are thinking about the future. And I think that the federal government's role is in part to encourage people and incentivize people to think about the future, and yes, make it more expensive for people who don't want to think about the future and don't want to prepare for the future today.
So along maybe? We got a chance.
I forgot the original question. But yes, there'll be more money for Alberta.
All right. I mean, just on that note, though, I mean, has there been conversations, and obviously this is a great room, but what about other industries? I mean, we talk about emissions caps for one very specific sector. Are there conversations going on with perhaps other sectors that will have to face some of this as well?
We are working with all sectors to reduce emissions, whether it's the agricultural sector, where we're seeing farmers being a huge force of actually how we reduce the impacts of droughts and floods, how we use less of the costly inputs, whether it's diesel or fertilizer, to actually be more productive and more efficient in our farming. There's huge innovations going on in the agricultural sector, and we're working with it. How are we working with the forestry sector? How are we working with manufacturing? These questions are happening across the board. But it remains that the oil and gas sector continues to be a significant source of emissions in this country, and that's why we're talking about putting a cap on emissions, one that we've worked closely with the industry on, a cap on emissions, not a cap on production.
Interesting. You touched on incentives, obviously you touched on CCUS. I mean, when we have our biggest neighbor to the south drop the IRA on us, how do we react? What's the thinking behind that? And what is that? And I want to lead into a second question, but that goes into this incentive portion. Like, is that the path forward? Is incentives the way, or have you started to think in other forms to support those investments?
Well, let's first of all understand what the IRA is. That is the United States realizing that it lost 4 years on innovation, on new technologies, on developing battery technology, on developing hydrogen, on developing the kinds of things that the previous administration had zero interest in. And they needed to massively turbocharge the green industry in the United States because they had had a president who didn't prioritize that. And that happened in the United States. It could happen anywhere where you lose massive amounts of time when the world is busy competing right now to be as clean, as green as possible. Not because it's some moral objective, but because there are trillions of dollars to be made in solving for reduced emission energy, in solving for the kinds of jobs and solutions that the world's going to need. And Canada is well positioned for that. So yeah, we couldn't match the IRA dollar for dollar. That just wasn't going to work for Canada. We do not have, well, we're not a reserve currency, so to keep our AAA rating, we have to be careful and strategic about where we're investing. But that's where our ICTs on renewables, on clean electricity, on carbon capture, utilization and storage, these are things that are actually getting to those incentives. When Volkswagen decided to come and invest in Canada for its largest, or its only battery producing factory in North America, it was thinking very carefully about going to the United States. And the US, no matter how much money we were putting on the table, and we managed to more or less match the IRA, the Americans would have put more money than we were able to on the table. I'm honest about that. But they chose to come to Canada. They chose because of our price on pollution and our clean energy. They chose because of our workforce. They chose because they know we are building the lithium, not just mines, but transformation capacities to be able to shorten those supply lines that right now all go through China. And the strategic concerns about dependency on a country that is demonstrated time and time again it's willing to use its economic connections for political gains. Like, there is a lot of interest in investing in Canada because there's a stability here that you don't see everywhere else, including in some uncertainties politically in the United States. There's a pitch we're able to make here in Canada that people are paying a lot of attention to. So yes, matching the ITCs in specific sectors that matter and that are strategic for us is something we're doing. And that's why, like I said, billions of dollars will be flowing to Alberta to match that IRA, to draw in that investment from around the world and from the United States. But it's also about making sure that we're there for the long term with that predictability and stability.
I'm getting the 5-minute signal, so I got two more. I know. I've got a couple more questions though. You talk about innovation. You talk about our ability to compete on the global stage. Obviously, we heard the Bank of Canada come out and talk about productivity. What are we doing about it? What's happening? What can we expect to see, whether it's on the 16th or previous or post that? What are we doing on productivity?
Productivity has been a challenge that has plagued the Canadian economy for decades now. And when you compare us to the United States and other places, we've always lagged slightly behind. And yes, governments of all different types have tried to solve it in various ways, and we'll continue to do our part in incentivizing innovation, supporting research and R&D. But we're also going to be working with the private sector, with business community, to make sure that we are looking at more innovations. One of the things where Canada has a natural lead, where we've built up an ecosystem over many years when the others didn't, is on automation, on AI. And with the labor shortage going around, with the fact that we have fewer people to do bigger jobs, AI and automation is going to be a big leverage of increased productivity as we choose to invest in the kind of innovation that Canada needs to see. So yeah, we're going to continue to invest in new technologies. We're going to continue to encourage businesses and create opportunities for businesses to succeed and to get support from the government. on innovative investments that are going to leverage the best workforce in the world to do even better with supportive technologies.
Okay, one last question. I think the elephant in the room. I mean, obviously there's tensions between Ottawa and Edmonton. We've heard that. We've seen it's been well publicized. We don't need to get into it. But, you know, as you leave this audience, is there something you can share with us that's going on behind the scenes? What's working well? Like, what's happening? What's well? And is there some notes of optimism that this room can take away today from the conversations that are happening?
I have, over the course of my time as Prime Minister, worked with Rachel Notley, Jason Kenney, and now with Danielle Smith. I have worked with every single premier across the country, has changed at least once or twice since I got into office. I've gone through now 3 American presidents. I've gone through God knows how many British or Italian prime ministers. And I think I have, it's sort of worrisome for our British friends that there's as many British prime ministers as there have been Italian prime ministers over the past 8 years. We've been focused on getting things done. And we've seen big things done, including here in Alberta, that have made a huge difference. Like cutting childcare fees in half. That's not something that the Alberta government would have put at the top of its list of things that it wanted to do. But we were able to do that together because the federal government knew that it mattered. And Albertans have recognized that, yeah, particularly after the pandemic when we saw what happens when kids are stuck at home for too long and productivity, making sure there's quality childcare for kids is an investment. We were able to do that. We were able to move forward on significant investments in energy projects. We've moved forward, like whether it's Dow or some of the CCUS stuff that I've been talking about. We've continued to be there to draw in global investments. Like I said, 60% increase in foreign direct investment, and as always, a lot of it coming to Alberta since we took office in 2015. We've seen cutting of child poverty rates in half. That has made a difference in Alberta. We've seen deals signed around healthcare that is going to continue to allow further investments in healthcare workers and finding primary care doctors, in digitization and improvements on delivery in healthcare, because the federal government is stepping up in partnership with Alberta. Listen, there's always going to be things where we're going to disagree, sometimes spectacularly. It turns out, having seen an old video, Danielle Smith, she even agrees with our price on pollution as being efficient and a way of putting more money in people's pockets, because that's what the price on pollution does. $1,800 for a family of 4, including the wealthiest families of 4 in Alberta, are going to get $1,800 with the Canada Carbon Rebate over the course of this year. For most families, middle class and lower income families, that puts more money in their pockets, something that Danielle recognized before she became leader and decided to play politics with this. It's on a video of her talking to the Fraser Institute, of all places. These are things that we're going to have to agree to disagree on. But I will always be there to work constructively, to support Albertans, to build a stronger economy for now and into the future, to recognize the importance and leadership, particularly of a young city like Calgary, where the young people trying to make ends meet, trying to build a future in the entrepreneurial, ambitious way that Calgarians always have. You need a federal government to be there, to be part of you. And no matter what the Premier says, no matter how much she is poking at me, I'm not walking away from Alberta. I'm not giving up on Calgarians. I'm going to continue showing up, talking about how we're going to work together to build a better future for everyone in this province, and indeed for everyone in this country. And like I said, it serves the entire country. Because for Canada to succeed, Alberta needs to succeed. And the world is changing in ways that are challenging, but not unpredictable, not entirely. And seeing where the puck is going, well, I can talk about a great Edmonton Oiler who did a very good job of that for many years. I know we're not going to get too many Oilers fans here, but the Canadian genius is to go where the puck is going, not where it is right now. The world is changing, and Albertans can and should be at the forefront of that. And that's exactly where I'm going to be always, with an outreached hand, and partnership to build a stronger Alberta.
Awesome. First of all, thank you everybody for being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time in having this conversation with our Prime Minister. Thanks to our Team Calgary partners who, again, without your support, we can't do any of this. And of course, to the Prime Minister for making time in your schedule to stop with us and have a chat with the group today. So thank you very much.